So far, we've been making lists using for loops. For example, let's make this length 12 list here consisting of all zeros. So we could say about my list equals empty, and then for I in range 12, then for each of those 12 steps, we want to put a new zero onto the list. So my list.append 0. Okay, and then let's check that that worked. So that's fine, but that is not what's considered the quote unquote correct way to make a list like this in Python. Instead, you should use what's called list comprehension. So let me show you an example of how to make this same list using list comprehension. So the first thing is the element that you want. So I'm going to be putting zeros into the list. And then I say for, and now it's just like a for loop. So you say a variable name. So in this case, I'll say x in range 12. So notice how similar this is, or maybe it would be better for me to say for I in range 12, just to have it match up closer to this. So here it is saying, like, how many times do you put something onto the list? And then here it is saying, what do you put onto the list? Another way that some people would write this, because we never actually use this I, so sort of the convention is sometimes to use an underscore when it's a variable that you're never going to refer to again. Okay, so there's another way to make it. Another way to make a different list is, for example, let's do I squared plus 1. So for example, this is 3 squared plus 1, this is 4 squared plus 1, and so on. So that's the reason why in general you would want to have a variable name here. So we're saying for I from 0 up to and including 11, put I squared plus 1 into the list. Okay, so here's 11 squared plus 1. So that's the basic syntax for list comprehension. Let me show you some other examples of variants of that syntax. So here I've made a list called my list, and now let's get the sublist of these elements that are strictly greater than 10. So here's the old way to do it. Let's say new list equals empty, and then I could say for x in my list, if x is strictly bigger than 10, then let's put it onto new list. So new list.append x. So I'm hoping this will show something like 20, then 12, and so on. Yep, that looks good. So that is the for loop way of making this. What's the list comprehension way of making this? Well, it's going to be very similar syntax to what we had up here, but the difference is that after the for loop part, after saying how many times to repeat, we're going to put an if condition. So here's the new way. So we're going to put x for x in my list if x is bigger than 10. And there is a way of making this sublist using list comprehension. So this part would have just produced the exact same my list, and then here it's saying only put x onto the list if it satisfies this condition. Here's going to be a very similar one, but I've never quite understood what the reason is for this. I just haven't memorized that you need to make this a little differently. Here we're going to have both an if statement and an else statement, but the if statement isn't going to come at the end. It's going to come here after the x. So let's check it. So let me first show the way to do it with a for loop. So I want to replace all the elements which are strictly greater than 10 with -3. So if x is strictly greater than 10, let's append -3. Otherwise, well, we'll just append x. And let's check how this worked. And let me remind myself what my list looked like. So this element 20 got replaced by this -3. This element 12 got replaced by this -3. And what's the list comprehension way of making this? So we're going to say x. Well, I'll make it more similar to this one. So we'll say put a -3 in if x is bigger than 10, else put an x on. This is saying, and 4x in my list. This is saying go through all of the elements in my list, and if that element is bigger than 10, put on a -3. Otherwise, put on that element x. And I'm hoping it shows the same as this new list. Let's check. Yep, that worked. And it's too bad that this way doesn't work. But let me show you. So how I would have first guessed that you would do it would be something like this. So this part is basically exactly what we had up above, the exact syntax that we had up above, and now we just have this extra else x. Maybe you can see that this part doesn't work. So you need to do it this way with both the if and the else coming before the for portion. Whereas up here, let's see what happens if I try to put the if at the beginning. So this way it doesn't work. Hey, again, that doesn't work. So I just have this memorized. I don't have a great explanation for why the syntax works this way. So last example, here's the old way with, there are a bunch of ways to make this, but let's do it with nested for loops because that's what I want to show in the list comprehension. So total length is 12. So that's like 6 repetitions of 3 and 10. So for x in range 6, maybe I'll call it I. For x in 310. Oh, and I forgot to initialize the list. Okay, so we'll say my list is empty, or let's say new list. Now, new list dot append x. So for example, first I is 0, then we're going to put on a 3, then we're going to put on a 10. Okay, let's check if this worked. Okay, good. So now how can we do the same thing using list comprehension? And so again, the first thing is what do you want to put on? So we want to put on an x. Like here was an x going on to the list. And now this part, first we give the outer one. And to me, both could make sense. I could make an argument for putting this inner one first, but the way it works with list comprehension is the outermost for loop goes first. So x for I in range 6, for x in 310. And there is a way of making this is the list comprehension version of having nested for loops. Okay, yeah, that's all I'll say in this video. Thank you for watching.